AI is here. Let's talk about how we can use it responsibly, but also how can we really supercharge our program so that we can better serve the community. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce our lovely panelists, starting to my farthest stage left, Joel Arquios, Executive Director of the SNAP Foundation, Joel Faree, Art Plus Technology Lab Program Director at LACMA, and Christine Minders, CEO of Poyeto. So, now let's go in. Oh yes, please give me a round of applause. Let's go. So, I will start my first question with you, Christine. So, what are the risks and benefits of incorporating AI tools into the nonprofit and artistic spaces?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. To give you a little bit of background, I've been working exclusively in AI for 8 years, very specifically community-focused AI, where folks own their own AI systems, engage in AI education, and can monetize their own data. So I just wanted to highlight the particular perspective I'm coming from. Within the nonprofits I work in and or consult, a lot of the things that we think about is how we can outsource some very important things along the lines of emotional labor. Let's say, for example, you're asked to engage in some actions that are quite challenging. Instead of engaging in that education process, you can go to ChatGPT. You can, use that tool to connect and offer training. Additionally, you mentioned content creation. There are a lot of wonderful things that you can do for grant writing, but overall, I think the pros and cons are challenging, to say the least. While it does help us in particular avenues, you also have to have a healthy awareness about some of the problems. So if you do have content generated from an AI system, some of that content may be inaccurate, some of it may have bias. Really kind of looking at what is coming out of these particular AI systems. You pass the question down? Yeah.
Well, thanks for having me. And I think I wholeheartedly agree with Christine. And I think it's important to engage, but engage critically. And while there is a lot of hype and there's also a lot of anxiety, to still really, get your hands, on these tools, work with them. But while you're doing that, ask questions. It's the same way, when you went to school and you learned to read and you learned to, read and think critically about the text. I think it's a similar kind of skill when you're acquiring or digital literacy, we could say. How does ChatGPT know what it knows? Is the data that it's trained on, where does that come from? Things that Christine mentioned, bias. And it's such a complex topic that I think it can be very overwhelming very quickly. But I think first and foremost, if you go into it thinking or engaging critically, you're able to ask questions while you're using these tools. And that's also a way for you to kind of keep your own actions in check when you're using these tools. So yes, if you're going to be drafting an acknowledgement letter to one of your donors, and ChatGPT could be a great source for that. But it's important to think about that output and to consider, okay, what are some things that may be off, and look for those things, because God forbid you don't want that donor to be put off by what the machine fed you. So I'm going to leave it there and hand it over to Joel.
Thank you. And just so you know, there's 2 Joels up here, and one of us is AI, by the way. I'm going to tell you which one. It's just a terrible AI joke. I come from the education space. I was a teacher for many years in San Francisco. I then ran an organization called HE6LA, which is pretty much on the other side of this high-tech stuff, which is really about sitting side by side with a young person and helping them tell their story, really develop their sense of pride in themselves and their ability to tell stories and to write. Now I'm in this different world. I do work for the Snap Foundation, but I just want to make it clear, I don't work for Snap, the company. The foundation was created from funds that were donated by the founders of the company, but it's a private foundation that's separate from the company itself. So I'm not here to proselytize or to get people to convert to AI. In fact, I've questioned it from day one. I was very nervous about it when it first kind of came up. And it first came up for me in the nonprofit space as I was helping a nonprofit sort of get off the ground. So after I worked at 826, I was trying to sort of figure out the new playing field we were in after the pandemic. And somebody, I learned from somebody that they were using AI as a way to generate content for their social media. And they had not used it to replace somebody in that work, but it was to help that person do a pretty big task, which in the case of this nonprofit, there was 5 different channels that they had to manage. They had to constantly bring up new content for the website. So it became a tool that this person was able to use as a way to help them do their job a little more efficiently. But it was shocking to me. I was like, I can't believe that this is a tool they're using. Flash to 2 years later, and I find myself as well, playing with this ChatGPT thing. And it's really the only experience I've had is really the ChatGPT and some image generation and other sorts of things. Definitely in the back of my head, I constantly think, well, what is it that I'm creating here? Is this really me? Is this something that I'm, putting forth as my own? I try to really be as honest as possible as I can with what I'm using it for, and ensuring that whatever is the final stage of this thing is as much mine as it might have been from something that was generated from the data sets that it pulls from. But all to say, it is something I've been seeing used a lot in nonprofits, and it does help efficiencies. I think of it as a tool. I think of it as something that can assist you in the iterative process of trying to think through an idea, trying to plan something. And so, I'll leave it at that, but I definitely, there's a lot more I could certainly say, but I want to pass it on.
And Nicole, I think you actually have an amazing example of using AI in the nonprofit space.
Just to add to and give kind of a perspective from someone who works within a foundation, I often use ChatGPT to check my tone within emails, within communicating with grantees, because I always want to be very mindful that I'm not coming across and reinforcing the power and privilege. And thank you guys so much. I think that really underscores that it's a two-sided conversation, and it's a trade-off that we have to continue to grapple. And so my next question is that in an era where AI is becoming more accessible, now you can go on Perplexity, ChatGPT, and still get a lot of things done for absolutely free. How important is it for nonprofit professionals and artists to develop AI literacy? And what steps can organizations take to enhance their understanding of AI's broader implications long term? And I would like to open it up if anyone feels more.
I'm happy to jump in.
Yeah, Joel, jump in.
I just read a study from Common Sense Media, which, surveyed, I forget how many, 1,500 students across the nation, teachers, parents, and it's clear that young people are using this as a tool. Some are using it to just do their homework. I have a 14-year-old daughter who swears she never uses it, and I believe her, but I do know that there are a lot of young folks who are using it and are doing their papers and all this sort of thing. So there's definitely a concern that we have to think about and how do we use it. That said, I do know that it is again a tool that has given sort of more efficiencies to nonprofits in some way. I love the example you gave of bias and of understanding how your tone is reflected in your writing. I do know that it's helped a lot of young folks who are maybe struggling with language, who are trying to learn English, or English as second language learners. I've seen examples where they've been sort of encouraged to maybe record themselves as they naturally speak in Spanish, maybe if that is their first language, and to then use it as a translation text to help them sort of see the mechanics of the work. So there's a lot of different uses that I've been seeing that have been very helpful, especially if you run a nonprofit and you do have parents who are Spanish speakers. How do you use it as a tool that can really then engage them as well? And I was struggling at 826 all the time because most of the parents of our youth were Spanish speakers. And we were using sort of the early stages of translation text. I speak Spanish, I'm able to do some of it, but I also am not great at it. So this became another way to sort of help, us be more supportive of families who, could really use this valuable information that we don't think about it, but we post our websites out there and most of it's always in English. There are some ways to actually translate it now where you can put it in whatever language you want, but you never know how great that is or how well it's serving folks. But these new tools do seem to do that. And I think I've totally gone in a different direction for your question, so I apologize.
This is perfect. We're talking about accessibility, and translation is actually, again, one of the biggest use cases as well, currently for nonprofits in the space.
Sure. I would also say to think of it not purely as like something that can just spit out content for you, but also as a research tool. The same way when in college and high school you're taught to have a works cited page at the end of your paper, and sorry, we're not off the hook. You still need to check the sources. And I think early on, a lot of these platforms didn't provide sources to their outputs. I remember when like Google Bard and ChatGPT both didn't really provide, if you were lucky, you got one citation in the output. And I think it's getting much better now. Often now you'll have an output that will have links within it, and you can that will take you to the original source. And I think that it's important to do that labor. And so in some ways, yes, using these tools will save you time, but then you have to also take the time to, check the source. Always, look up that citation, even if the answer feels comfortable. I've caught myself so many times where I'm like, I should just check that. I'm like, oh, that's not what I totally thought that was from another source. And I'm actually not comfortable using, that source. So again, I think really think of it first and foremost as a research tool, and bringing in, that sort of critical engagement that you would have as a researcher.
Yeah, I definitely want to add on to the Joel's. I think one of the really interesting things that you're talking about is translation. That's an amazing resource in helping nonprofits. I know we're having huge challenges in education institutions about folks responding to the use of AI in education. And we should be having these conversations, and we should be having challenges. One of the ways that we talk about it within higher ed is to have individuals identify their original ideas, cite those ideas, cite the use of GPT or Claude or whatever generative system, and then cite their edits. You can use the tool, but again, further to your point, you need to cite how you're using the tool. Another thing to add, when you do pull up these articles, they're not always properly weighted. Maybe they're referencing one article very heavy and the other two are slightly referenced, and what's kind of output is not always accurate. So I think that's such a significant thing. To give you a very specific example, I've had many conversations with ChatGPT over the years, and some of those conversations really entail trying to understand with the system how it's citing itself. So for example, we have this argument around artificial general intelligence, which I would argue we're years away from. However, that seems to be a dominant narrative. And so within that space saying, hey, please be reflexive in your response. How are you moving towards artificial general intelligence? And in that particular platform with OpenAI, the system, the conversation indicated that it was, which is frankly untrue. This is multiple versions. You also need to cite the version of GPT that you're using. So I make students cite exactly how they're using it, what they did as a human, what this modification did. And that's also something that we do within Poieto is highlighting the software that we use, the data that goes into the software, and how that is cited as well. So building the tools and using the tools effectively.
Sorry, I just want to jump. I think that Christine, what you're moving towards, and I think what I want to highlight is this idea of best practices, which we don't have yet, but I think it's exactly what you're talking about.
And I would also add to that it uncovers some of just like the foundational layers within our organizations where we realize, oh wait, we don't have that at all. Like maybe we need to work on that. Like just a show of hands, who has a data policy? Not a lot. Who knows the difference between like sensitive information versus non-sensitive for their organization? Just kind of roughly off the cuff. Okay, so there's a lot of work to do, and I think that's the perfect segue into kind of thinking about, with AI-generated content, choosing what you put into an LLM if you do choose to. What are the key considerations around data ownership, copyright, intellectual property that organizations should be aware of to protect both creators and institutions? Christine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is huge. And one of the things, just to acknowledge, my partner has worked in music licensing for over 20 years. And a lot of artists and nonprofit organizations have been so directly affected by it, come to our house every month. We engage in these conversations around copyright and ownership and how that particular information is monetized, is trained, and specifically the duration of that licensing. It's very much a licensing issue, but also a historical issue when it comes to model training. One nonprofit that we're working with right now, it's a really, really interesting case because they have these beautiful old texts, but within those texts you have different types of copyright. You have the notes that are in the margins, which may follow and have ownership by a completely different person. So when you're scanning those materials, you may have to scan and download and use OCR locally, versus connecting with the cloud. We also do a lot of work with tribal nations, and so very specifically, data, once it leaves the device and goes into the cloud, is no longer considered sovereign. So the way that we talk about tagging data, the way that we talk about owning and training is very, very relative. And that's where, again, the principles come in. I will give a shout out to Feminist AI as well as Poieto, but Feminist AI started in 2016 with their whole principles, very specifically identifying their intentions and working with AI, understanding bias. And one final shout out as well, there's a lot of information written about the problematic approaches to search, to AI, and bias that comes from the Center for Critical Internet Inquiry and the work of Professor Sophia Emoja-Noble at UCLA. So I also want to highlight there's a lot of knowledge within this space within LA. And I'll pass it to you, Joel. Or Joel.
Yeah, I would say I run Lagos Art Technology Lab, and because of just the nature of our program, the artists that we work with come into the program already thinking about these ideas of copyright and rights and what have you. Often they're approaching it from a sort of more radical approach in terms of around the definition of fair use, those questions. But at the same point, they are really interested in their own rights, because I think there's two sides to it. They're interested in our museum and our collection and the rights of the artworks that are in our collection, and if they can use images or other data that's related to our own art collection. So there was that side, but but there's the flip side too of, okay, what about your own work as an artist? What are your feelings about the documentation of your work being ingested by a large language model? Are you comfortable with that? Have you thought about that? And so it's kind of definitely with our program, it's a knife that cuts both ways. And while I think I've been very fortunate to work with artists that are already so advanced in their thinking that I had to work very hard at putting myself in a position to learn from them, because they are already doing so much research. And it's very helpful for myself as well as for the museum, because I can share a lot of their learnings, their research with the larger institution. But I guess what I'm getting at, though, is an importance when you're thinking about rights and copyright and what have you. It's important to think about process in your organization and how you address rights issues, how you address these issues, these concerns, especially when it comes to things that are technology related, because it moves so fast. I think a lot of us saw that also with Web3 and NFTs. We just were like, what? And so again, to kind of try and stay as nimble as possible, or at least to just talk to people who are not in your department if you're in a large cultural organization. Those, interdepartmental conversations are really key to navigating whatever challenges technology is going to throw at you.
I sort of bring back this idea of the code of conduct, some sort of organizational, principles that you come up with together to really be on the same page about how this tool is used. Because I think a lot of people use it sort of in a closeted way. Like, I think a lot of folks are in the back end, hoping nobody knows I'm using ChatGPT, but it's a technology that's being used in lots of different ways. So I think being open and having a conversation about it, but being on the same page about what the benefits are, what are the challenges, this is very important to highlight too, is the artists and giving credit to the researchers, giving credit to the authorship of those who produce this. So those are all things to really keep in mind. But I would also throw out another sort of little controversial, I don't know if this would be controversial, but when I became a teacher, I remember I was just desperate for cool ideas that I could help. I was a history teacher, and I just was always looking for great content that I could get my students engaged in. And a lot of you run organizations and have programs. And so I was always encouraged literally to steal from other teachers, and they was like, hey, here, you can steal this idea, you can steal this idea. And so I see interesting ways that you can use ChatGPT. Not that I'm asking you to steal, not that I'm saying that you should publish this and put your name on it. But if you're trying to develop content or try to come up with a lesson plan to help a group of students maybe understand something in art, understand something in music, it's also another tool that I've seen used to generate lesson plans, generate ideas that they're not for you to make money on, but it's for you to really engage with young people in a way that might really speak to them and might bring out new sort of ways of presenting information that you weren't on your own aware of, and especially if you don't have somebody else or a group of people to work with to come up with content for your youth. So just something to think about out there as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I would love to hear from you, Joel or Christine, too, of just additional ways you've actually seen AI be as a tool for engagement or better understanding of artistic concepts, or just in education, or just use within the arts. Yeah, this Joel F.
Let's see. Well, I think in a lot of our artist projects, a lot of our inspiration, I think, for our tech lab have come directly from our artist projects, and just that's where our learning, most of our learning transfer is in terms of new technology. And with AI, it's been interesting because for artists, working with a large language model can be intimidating. You don't know what's in it. You don't know it's almost like junk food, the data that goes into it, because you don't know, it has a long list of ingredients. You don't know what more than half the ingredients are. There's these, and so really, it's this idea of garbage in, garbage out, that still holds even for AI. But with artists that are kind of struggling in their practice and to engage with this technology, small data, you can work with small data sets, and there's a lot of different platforms you can use for this. I mean, you can't get really under the hood and get very extremely technical really fast, but then there's also, I would say lighter versions of these platforms that you could use. There's a lot of image generators that you can curate your own data sets. And then that also is the same for text with like things like Google Notebook LM, or where ChatGPT, you can create a custom GPT where you have curated the data set. Now, I want to add the caveat that while you are, in a sense, bracketing what data you're accessing, that it's still using the large language model to process and to understand that content that you've already curated. So it is coming at you still with an interpretation that may have some bias. So you're not totally out of the woods. But I do think, even, like I said, these more user-friendly platforms have a lot of promise.
Yeah, I'd like to build off of that. Your model personalization, and that's something that we've been working on significantly with organizations to say, hey, this is the data that we own. How are you going to personalize it? And within that, you may use 75% of GPT-4 or whatever version you're using, but you still own your content, we call them frames, that you put on a particular project. You may license that, you may keep it internally. It really depends on what you want to do, but you can adjust the weighting to prioritize your specific data, and that's what we advocate for. We're not in a place where we completely do away with GPT. We err more towards Claude, but within that, we still have to use them, but we're slowly trying to back organizations away where they have more and more ownership of their data. And I think that's very significant. I really love that you're highlighting it, because it's what is driving AI. I'd love to give a case that's a little bit more personal in education. And I want to give an example of an organization that I just see doing it really well. And it just really acknowledge the work of Inner City Arts. Toyota has had the opportunity to work with them on many various occasions, and one of the things that we have worked with them is to focus on kids' education, which really helps us understand adult education too. We're all in the same boat. But very specifically saying, hey, what are these concepts that children need to learn right now? How do we teach and learn from these children in this particular way? And so we've created personalized models for education institutions that are more representative of multiple artists that are local to LA. I mean, that's significant, right? Artists should be, taught in these schools, and Inner City Arts is doing such a phenomenal job. And I think a very specific example that I love is simply explaining style transfer. Looking at students learning, hey, this is a style of muralist Judy Baca. You can take this and you can take your existing artwork and you can train it on that style. Who owns this work, right? Is it Judy? Did you reference Judy? Is it the platform that you made? Is it your drawing that you made from Judy's work? How might we reference that? And having kids really think critically about that, create their trees of tracing. And so I think LA is such a rich artistic place to do that. And I just wanted to acknowledge an organization I thought was doing it quite well.
Thank you, and that was a wonderful use case. And I think as we talk about data and sourcing and making sure we give folks their credit, I think we ought to also just give more space to what are the guardrails that we can put in place on the flip side before we dive really deep into use cases. I would love to hear if you guys have seen anything or are doing certain things to protect your own data or to just establish best practices for yourselves. Again, feel free to take the moment. I know we talked briefly about protecting images and things like that.
Well, we talk. I think there's this concept called the poison pill within image generators. Or if you are an artist, there are these applications you can use where it will embed. I don't want to say problematic data, but it will. And Christine, jump in if you're a bit more. But basically what it will do is it will slightly alter, not visually, but alter an image enough so that when it is ingested by a large language model, it will sort of trigger this sort of poison pill activity or action. which basically ruins that data set. And so what happens then is if it detects that your image that it's ingested is laced with this poison pill, it will not ingest it. And so as an artist, it's one way to protect your data, your work. And there are a number of them out that are available to use. But I think there's, we also talked about watermarking. And I'm not sure if there's a musical analog to the visual one, to the visual poison pill option, but I'm assuming there is or there will be. I think it's probably just because of the concern is there in the music industry as well.
Thank you. And I know you brought up, I think, Nightshade and Spawn.
Nightshade.
Some great examples. And then very specifically, if you're talking about protecting data, having that data reside in someone who's overseeing that data, who is responsible. And I think that's such a significant thing. Do you want this to be publicly available, or should this be locked within your organization? And looking at nonprofits, there's a lot of knowledge in these organizations that you learn over time. And that's something that can be accessible, probably not to everyone or to everyone. It really kind of depends on your organization. And so how you are securing, sourcing, and citing that data, to me, is probably the most important thing.
And I would like to add too, just as from a funder perspective, we often, as a guardrail, take out any type of numerical value. If we're putting it in ChatGPT, we block out grantee names. We're just extra careful because we want more of a general draft than an actual replica of like exactly what we want. Just because we still don't know, even with the highest subscription, what is really going into these models yet.
And teachers didn't know that, right?
Right.
That's something that's so significant. Don't put names of your students, your colleagues, anything in GPT. Just exit out, please.
Exactly. And moving deeper into this, but more so on the lens of how are you guys just using AI and day-to-day application to further bolster your work?
I mean, for me, it's become a small operation at the foundation. We're just two people. We, there's a lot of different things to sort of try to process and understand. I make it a point to read through our applications, our reports. We make them short, though, so it's not an overwhelming thing. We really want to, make the burden not so much of a burden. And so I have used it to help me condense information, to help me summarize information, to present to the board, to help advocate for the nonprofits that put their work into this. I've used it also as a way to look at numbers and to give me visuals to understand where's the impact happening, what's, from how these students are being served to where are the communities that these students are being served. We do try to collect some demographic information. Obviously, no names are used. This is all just data that we do our best to sort of make sense of so that we can tell a story, and I can tell a story to my board when I'm trying to get, grants approved. It's also just been helpful, like I said earlier, in putting together, I even used it to help generate questions for interviews. At one point I had, here's a job description. Here are some examples of work that's been done. Can you generate some questions that could help me, run an interview? And so I have used it in just in different ways because, like I said, I don't have anybody that can help me with these things, and so it's been good as a tool for those things. But again, if I had a team that I could build out, which eventually will, I'd want to make sure that we're transparent and open about how we're using this, so it doesn't feel like it's some sort of hidden, superpower that we have.
I'd say primarily research, in that when we're working on an artist project, there's often a number of texts, supporting texts, if you've gone through these texts or read them, whether they're research papers or what have you, maybe you've read them a year ago or what have you, and you are trying to remember, oh wait, which one was it that said this? And so I often will upload these documents to something, typically it will be like to GPT or to Notebook LM, and I can just run queries on those specific documents, and it saves. I remember back before that when I'd have to go through, speed reading through all these different texts to try and find the information I was looking for. So that's, for me, that's the most helpful.
Christine? Yeah, I think GPT, Claude, all of these LLMs are so helpful, but they're so problematic. So as you're starting to use, these for interview questions, which we all do, a very common thing, try to think of a particular lens. Who are you interviewing? Can you have folks who can also help support with those questions to reflect something that wasn't just trained on a system that's been trained off of Enron emails and trained off of, problematic Wikipedia information. And so I think just being very mindful that you use the information, but I know, and Joel, we were talking about this backstage, you're critically looking at how you're using it and personalizing it, and to continue to always personalize it, just don't spit it out. Which I think is such a significant thing for us.
Yeah, I think it is a good point too. Like for me, a lot of it is the structure. And when I do an interview, I don't go off the page, but it gives me the structure, and then it allows me to sort of do my thing. And that's been helpful in a lot of different contexts, even speaking on panels or even speaking, and it helps you just to make sure, that just helps you organize your thoughts. But when I speak, I usually don't speak from notes. It's something that comes up that helps me sort of think about structure in my mind as an assistant, as a tool.
The best way to look at things is to really assess, what are my use cases? Am I comfortable delegating this? And then moving forward in that. I would also like to posit the question about the workforce in terms of creativity. There's certain industries where it's very clear now emerging AI has caused a lot of anxiety within the workforce, especially the arts. What are your guys' thoughts on that, and how we as a community can kind of also provide ourselves agency within this space and actually propel work forward?
I mean, I'm pretty nervous about that aspect of it. I'm seeing the impact on a regular basis. I'm sure we all have friends who are in the film industry or in other industries that are completely impacted by AI, not just AI, but AI being a component of a larger change and shift in the industry. My own wife is a photographer, and she hasn't worked in a long time. And I don't know if you can just blame that on AI, but I do know that has taken up some of the efficiencies that, would usually depend on folks to do. So it's a very, very quickly changing environment. And we're in the work with the SNEF Foundation to help the creative economy. That's what we focus on. So, part of my hope is to also understand AI, understand what it's capable of, so I can be better informed in understanding and supporting organizations. But I also do know that, there are a lot of jobs, I think, that are definitely not going to be done because of this technology. So how do we advocate for ensuring that work is kept as work has been in some ways, and that we are also able to find a common ground that helps us understand in a human way that people need to work, and that creative jobs need human input, and that we don't get lost in some sort of corporate takeover of this kind of thing where it becomes an industry standard. So I think we should advocate, and as artists we should push for policy and for protections to ensure that this doesn't take over, what human beings can do better.
I think first it's important to consider when you're thinking about automation. Automation is something that we've wrestled with historically for over 100 years now. So this isn't anything new. But at the same time, it's the speed at which these technologies are being implemented and adopted and implemented, developed. And so I think one thing is to, and again, it's like I'm a broken record, but think critically about it. Okay, instead of looking at the blanket concern of just wholesale automation, you're replacing all of our jobs, looking at, okay, where exactly are the risks? What can we do to ensure, these jobs, to keep people employed? And and kind of, you have to kind of get to the nitty gritty rather than kind of surrender to the wholesale anxiety of, oh, it's gonna, the robots are coming, they're gonna take all of our jobs. I do that enough anyway in my free time to worry about stuff, but I feel like it's important to think about where exactly these, pain points are and how we can pick them apart. And think about, okay, those specific people who are affected, how can we give them the skills to adapt?
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm very worried. And I think, and the reason that I'm saying I'm very worried is maybe different than the robots are taking over, but I think there's such a fear of AI, and rightly so, but folks don't have the full information to understand what to be afraid of. And I think that professional development is so significant to say, hey, these are tools you should take a hold of. Don't let them take a hold of you. You take a hold of these tools. You make them work for your practice. And I think that is such an important point. Again, artists who I've been friends with for 25 years are losing work. Pseudo AI can write songs, based off of half of their work. They're not getting paid for it. Working within a system that has proper attribution, payments, looking at licensing of models, that is what we're advocating for. And I think it's such a significant issue in the arts. Another just very small example, because I also teach AI culture creativity at Cal Arts, and some of the questions I get, are like, is this original? Is this my work? Is this not? Do I have a future in this field? Those are very real questions to be asking, looking at editing software replacing jobs, in entertainment. So I think one of the things that I truly hope happens is folks are able to get education, professional development, and not kind of the, hey, everything's going to be great, a very realistic professional development.
I think that's great, and thank you for calling out education and professional development and advocacy, because I think we do have to decide what AI means for us. Does it mean automating inequity, or does it mean amplifying our impact? Like, literally, what does it mean? And I think we're at this critical juncture where we do have the agency to decide. And so to kind of begin the wrap up, I would like to also just begin with, what are your key takeaways that you have for yourselves that you would like to impart on this audience with your own personal journey with AI as you stand? You can take a moment, because I know it's like a big question, but it just seems like every day we are getting hit with new AI developments, different news. It can be a lot, and sometimes we just need to kind of all, again, level set.
Yeah, I tend to just jump in, and it's probably not very AI of me. But I think it's learning not to fear it is what I'm hoping. I'm just trusting that it's a tool, and that's how I think about it. And I think that if I can help myself learn, I can help myself express myself, I can get the assistance I might need with particular tasks, I feel like that is how I want to use it. I know that if I were a teacher, which back I was mentioning earlier, that would have been something really exciting to me, to help find ways to really just challenge students and build curriculum and really design. It's funny, when I was teaching, it was when blogs first came out, and this is like before Facebook. I'm an older person here, and we decided, I was a history teacher, and we decided that we were going to just jump in, and we were going to figure this tool out before it figured us out. Obviously we didn't win, but we started developing curriculum where we had young people writing in a closed space where kids from I was teaching in San Francisco at the time, communicating with kids in Maine, and we used it as a way to connect young people, to help them sort of lead the way, tell about their stories, and in a way that we could not have done without this technology. So I'm hopeful that there are going to be big ways that this is used by educators, by artists, by others, that will help us become closer, help us understand our world a little bit better, help us maybe create new understandings as well. So I'm very hopeful that this could be used, if it's being used by people with good intentions, and hopefully to help. In my world, I believe in education and in youth and in helping them sort of build that next generation. So hopefully it'll inspire teachers and others to build content that's exciting and interesting and can help move the dial for young people.
Yeah, to riff off of Joel, I'd say three things. One, don't stick your head in the sand. This is not going away. This is not, I think a lot of us during the Web3 NFT bubble, we're just kind of like, just hang on, it will go away, and it actually kind of hasn't. I mean, I think we kind of think it has, but a lot of those infrastructures still exist. And with AI, it's like tenfold. This is change, and it is coming fast. And so I think number two would be to think critically instead of get your head out of the sand and think critically, ask questions, be relentless, because that's the one thing you can count on is change. And so if you're just in the habit of just constantly questioning, constantly, trying to figure these things out, that's a lot of the work right there. And then third is emphasize process within your organization. Best practices as we knew them are gone. And, I think we went through this at LACMA with NFTs. We had to kind of, as we brought NFTs into our art collection, we had to figure it out, like how do we care for these and be the custodians of these digital objects, and still, pay mind to the artist, pay mind to the donor, pay mind to the work. And so you have to, that's where process comes in. And it's not like you can just, figure it out one and done. It's going to be an ongoing process, as opposed to just having this new solution that you're going to implement and then you're going to relax because it's this new solution. It's going to be a sort of more fluid thing.
Yeah, I would say absolutely align with all of the points you said, but build responsible systems. I think that's such a significant thing. Understand that we're talking about Gen AI right now, we're talking about LLMs, but because it is so cost prohibitive to run at a certain point, all of this is artificially inflated. You understand it's going to go away. You'll have local models, right? You'll have more control, but take control of your data. Take control of your knowledge, take control of your art, take control of your practice. I think that's very significant. Additionally, the principles, make sure you have guiding principles, and just please keep moving forward with education. Just keep learning.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for your insights. This has been a wonderful conversation. And I would just like to close out as well. I think the key theme, if you guys take away, is agency. You can do something. Own your data, come to events like this, get out there and talk to people, because everyone's trying to figure this out. And the more we work together, there's always strength in numbers. And I think there's also a lot of opportunity to really do some groundbreaking work with AI powering us on the back end as we front load all of this human first work that we know is so important. So thank you.